Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be spending the next 15 minutes talking about the intersection of fintech, picking up on some of the topics that have been discussed earlier this morning, and blockchain, which has also obviously had several references already. So I'll be looking at three key questions over the next quarter of an hour. How can fintechs generally work more effectively with the banking community? Then switching specifically to blockchain and where some of the challenges are with the fintechs I'm working with and we're working with as far as blockchain technology is concerned, some of the questions and decisions they need to make. And then thirdly, blockchain, as all of you know, I'm sure, is especially in the wholesale markets, is a team sport. No point being the first owner of a fax machine. So the question is, what are the kind of challenges that exist as networks get built and communities and consortia get built in order to take advantage of fintech technology, which is focused on blockchain. So first off, just some opening comments. I mean, some of these are the themes that have been referred to by earlier speakers, but clearly there are lots of strategies available to firms in terms of how they foster and innovation as far as their businesses are concerned. There's an internal innovation focus for many. There's questions of buying innovation, partnering and collaborating, be it directly with fintechs or through incubators, the ability to seed investments and to create new entities and brands. And as you probably can't see on the right-hand side, there are many bank examples who have taken this kind of route, and obviously accelerators in particular, which, as you can see, 43% of this particular survey were taking place through that kind of route, is a key example of how innovation is generated within the banking community at the moment. Switching to blockchain, I mean, this is just an example of the kinds of logos from blockchain firms within financial services. And the first point is it's a very large community. This is a global perspective. Second point is a large proportion of these are actually within the financial markets part of the industry, far more than you would normally see within the fintech community. I think that's in part because the wholesale markets already have ready-built networks, if you like. Central market operators such as the exchanges, the CCPs, the CSDs, etc. And there's both a real requirement for innovation in that area because of the cost of the kind of relatively inefficient processes that we have within the wholesale markets, and also an opportunity for potential disruption as well. So as you can see, there's quite a few there focusing within the wholesale markets. And I should say most of the comments I'll be making will be primarily focused on the wholesale side as well. But obviously, most of these logos wouldn't have existed 2 or 3 years ago, so we're still seeing a huge explosion, really, in terms of innovation, and that applies to blockchain as much as it does within the broader fintech community. So just turning to the first question I mentioned in terms of ideas, in terms of how innovation can be fostered through the fintech community into banks. Many of you will be familiar with Innovate Finance and their initiative around the industry Sandbox, which was published earlier this year, and the conference that Innovate Finance ran. From our point of view, we obviously work primarily with the financial services community. 40% of our global business is with banks. Therefore, it's very much in our interest to be collaborating within this ecosystem with the fintechs, the regulator, the financial institutions, of course, and the impact that has on our business, both as a means of contributing ideas, innovations, patents, code, as well as the commercial benefits that we may get as a result of that collaboration. So the industry Sandbox is an initiative we strongly support, and through the work led by Innovate Finance, there are 2 key areas that we focus on primarily, which we think are really important in terms of being able to foster fintech adoption. First of those is around certification. Many of the fintechs I'm working with, when they approach us, they're looking for some endorsement in terms of their technology, how they work, the kind of levels of skills that they have within the business, etc. And when we're working with the bank side of the equation, there's obviously a question of understanding what they are hearing from the fintech, whether that's exactly what would be delivered were they to go down that particular road. So the certification process is a means of being able to create an open, level playing field in terms of fintechs being able to cooperate in building a response certificates in terms of how they approach technology, what kind of approach they use for development, how they manage information within their application, how they approach resilience, for example, all the things that are really important from a bank's point of view. how they manage their business in terms of demand management, so there's a confidence that this is a sustainable business model as a bank puts more focus on the fintech. And then how do they manage operationally? How do they support their application? How do they provide the right service levels, etc.? And from the bank's point of view, obviously, if there's an understanding of all those questions, there's a much greater level of confidence that there's been an independent, and this is the key point, it's an independent and open approach perspective that is giving greater levels of confidence in terms of what is being required. So this is very much, from our point of view, work in progress at the moment. We've developed quite a lot, as you can see on the bottom right there, of the structure required to do this. We see it, as I said, as being an open exercise. Our interest is in facilitating the certification alongside other firms that we will soon be doing the same kind of thing. The other area which we think is really important to foster adoption is really reference architecture. So again, one hears stories of fintechs that are coming into a banking environment for the first time and are faced with having to build 20, 30 different interfaces to the legacy systems that exist within a bank. It can be a huge effort and a huge level of complexity, and obviously is a barrier in terms of being able to realize the innovation in practice. So the work here is focusing on developing, again, an open reference architecture approach, which the banks are contributing to in terms of being able to have a common functional domain view, an enterprise domain view, which is generic across the banks concerned, and something that enables the fintechs to be able to work out how they will integrate into the systems of insight, systems of integration, systems of record, etc., in a much more consistent way, rather than having to do that on an ad hoc basis, and therefore taking far longer to get to a proof of value, which obviously is a really important element of how the fintech is going to prosper in that respect. Okay, the second question I was going to turn to was some of the questions that fintechs that are focused on blockchain technology face. So this is a survey that Greenwich published a little while ago, and it's really one of the core questions, I think, which is what kind of technology approach will a blockchain fintech actually take? Because fundamentally there are two choices here. One is to take an open source approach, to work with one of the major open source fabrics that's available for blockchain. And again, in the financial services world, there are really three dominant technologies at the moment, measured by the number of firms that are supportive within the consortium or the organization. So those are the Hyperledger project, which IBM is a major sponsor and contributor to, which has around over 160 members at the moment. Obviously, the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, which has, I think, north of 150 members at the moment. And then thirdly, R3, in terms of the banking community, and the 70-plus members and owners that they have in that respect. Three different technologies. Hyperledger project has multiple technologies, but the most mature is probably Fabric. Corda, obviously, from R3, and the work that the Alliance is doing as far as Ethereum is concerned. Those are all open source options, and as you can see just from this survey, that tends to be almost twice as many firms that are responding to the survey prefer to take that route because of the openness and the flexibility that gives, rather than more proprietary routes, where basically the option is to build a vertical stack of technology, in which case the fabric then becomes proprietary, raises questions on interoperability, etc. This is not by any means a complete set, but just taking some of the fintechs and technologies that are out there in the blockchain financial services world. Obviously, there's a split at the moment. So from our point of view, very much the preferred route is to work within one of the open source communities, and the most expansive of those is really Hyperledger, where we have, as I said, over 160 firms at the moment, ranging from the large financial market infrastructure providers like DTCC, etc., large banks like JP Morgan, Morgan State Street, and many others. And as you can see, a large number of fintechs as well. So in many respects, it's probably the largest meeting place that exists between fintechs focused on financial services and blockchain and the financial services firms, as well as a number of central market operators, well, like the Bank of England, for example, who are an associate member. The third point I was going to make was really the question of business networks. So as I mentioned, for a fintech focused on a blockchain proposition, it's obviously all about building a business network of some sort, because that's fundamentally what blockchain technology is all about. This is just a snapshot of some of the projects in the public domain that we've been working on in the last year. What's interesting is a large proportion of them are within the financial markets infrastructure space, by which I mean the CSDs and the exchanges, etc. where there's obviously a significant network operator that already has a role and responsibility and typically will be leading these kinds of projects. But what we're seeing, obviously, is a movement from POC to production. I think very much next year that will be a key theme that we're seeing. And the growth of banking consortia in order to focus on those business cases where there isn't a central market operator. So let me just make a couple of comments. The projects here at Northern Trust, which is already in production, DTCC and CLS, in these cases there is a central operator that's taking responsibility for the network that they're providing. They act as the lead focus, taking the operational responsibility as far as the business network. But digital trade chain on the top left there, which is now called WeTrade, which is going into production in the first quarter next year, now 8 banks. There is no central market operator, and that raises a whole set of questions on how will the network actually be operated, both in terms of the technology platform, but also in terms of the business operations aspects as well. And in many respects, for those fintechs that are working within the wholesale environment, where the nature of the proposition is that there isn't a pre-existing central market operator, then understanding how that function will be performed in this kind of private permissioned world, which is clearly what I'm talking about primarily, is a significant challenge. To give you an idea, this is just a point of view in terms of the kind of components that are required in order to build business networks within the wholesale markets where a consortium of some sort has to be built, such as the WeTrade example I mentioned before. And clearly the technology, as you can see on the left-hand side, is just one relatively small part of the architecture that is required, including the business operations, the people, the functional side, the governance model, which is critical, and the incorporation of the entity. So in the case of WeTrade, starting off from a decision, I think back in April of last year, it's only this month that the WeTrade will be incorporated as a new joint venture owned by the 8 banks that are the primary sponsors of the initiative, and then will take on the responsibilities for the boxes you can see here in terms of the governance, the working groups, the business strategy, the onboarding, the corporate structure model, onboarding and offboarding of banks, etc. So a lot of that has to be built, and it therefore represents a significant challenge for the fintech sitting in the technology box in terms of being able to having all these other things that are going on around the overall business model in order to actually realize, again, the path to value in that respect. So the only easy answer to that, and by no means is it an easy answer, I think, is just to find out in advance who are the right partners to facilitate this kind of process. In the case of WeTrade, that's very much the role that we're providing, building and integrating and running the application on the behalf of the 8 banks. But in the broader context, it gives you an idea, I think, of the kind of challenges that exist and need to be overcome in terms of however the entity is going to realize. And really some kind of closing comments in that kind of respect. The governance model is critical. It takes a long time to get started. When we started working with what was at the time 7 banks of the WeTrade consortium, we ended up with 21 different contracts, and it gives you an idea of the complexity of that consortia actually have as they move from 7 banks that normally compete, or 8 banks that normally compete, into a single entity that is cooperating and working out where the lines are, working out where the on-premise versus off-premise, the cloud, the security, all the other kind of technical issues that the consensus needs to be reached is really critical compared to the business model and governance model that needs to sit on top of that. So that's all I was going to cover. Hopefully that gives you a good perspective.
Thank you very much.